Hi, everyone. First off, a chat of 2022. Here with me today is Jonathan Smidt, and he is the author of the Bone Dungeon series and Dungeon Core Online, part of the Dungeon Core subgenre of lit RPG. And it should be full disclosure that Jonathan is also one of the authors over at Portal Books. So that's why we like him extra, man.
That's why you guys tolerate me.
Would you like to, yeah, yeah, we tolerate you. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us about yourself and your books.
Yeah, sure. As Michael said, I'm Jonathan Smidt. A lot of you probably know me by my handle online of Glyax. That's what I run within Discord, Royal Road, Patreon, all of that stuff. Um, as he's disclosed, I write for Portal. Currently, most all my books published are in the Dungeon Core subgenre of lit RPG. We started out with Bone Dungeon, which was written back in 2018 and first published in 2019. That is a completed trilogy now, with a decent reception. And then Dungeon Core Online is the current series that we've been putting out. We've got 2 books out in that series. We have Dicking Around coming out here shortly, which is a actual lit RPG story within the DCL world, and then we'll have Dungeon Core Online 3 coming out shortly after that. Otherwise, I don't know. Just I'm the average green-haired author.
Is it green now? Used to be blue. What happened to the blue? I think it's still
So
blue, right?
yeah, there's some teal, there's some red, there's some green.
What's next? What's the next color?
I usually stick with the blues and greens, and then I put like a front stripe. That's where the red is. I
Yeah,
joke around and say it's like my pro tag patch because like all animes they have a
yeah,
protagonist
that
and
one
he always does
streak.
that one
Yeah,
streak. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's my joke. That's my pro tag patch. We're working on growing it out long enough right now to do like a Viking hairstyle.
Excellent. Well, we'll have you back on when that happens to
Yeah.
make sure we'll keep up to date with that.
I figured it would fit
So
the blacksmithing visage.
right, yeah. Well, that's two things. So I mean, we could jump right into that, but first I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Dungeon Core Online because it's a pretty wacky idea for a book. Do you want to tell us, like, how did you start that? Where did the inspiration for that come? Well, tell us a little bit about it first, for those that don't know, and
Okay.
then and the weirdness, and go from there.
All right, yeah. So Dungeon Core Online is actually it was my first Royal Road story. Um, it's a Dungeon Core novel, but instead of just being set in like a fantasy world, with the Dungeon Core, it's actually set kind of in a futuristic modern world. So it takes place in the year 2057. So the main character is a gamer, and they have full immersion virtual reality, and he's a Dungeon Core for that. Uh, it actually came about. It started because I was kind of like bored and trying to entertain myself while I was waiting for Bone Dungeon to be edited. So I hopped onto Royal Road and I was just like, I want to see what exactly I can get away with. Like, I was loving reading all the
Sure.
lit RPG books and everything, and I was just like, how much can I push Dungeon Core and get away with? And like, the reception was just ridiculous. It flew up into the top 200 on this site for a long while. It's amassed like 6 million plus views. It's over 600,000 words now worth of content, but, yeah, it literally was just the very first ever mob that gets mentioned in the book is called a Dickin. It's a demonic chicken, um,
Right. Yeah.
'cause when
And
I
and
wrote
thus and thus a whole novella was born.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's and it was I mean, the joke for that was, like, I got to where he was summoning his first ever mob, and I'm like, "Alright, he's a random dungeon. What is he gonna summon?" And I just kinda blanked, and I looked at the screen, and I'm like, "I don't even know." So I wrote the word chicken and just kinda walked away. And I like grabbed lunch and I came back and I was like, it's not just a chicken though. It's a demonic chicken. The game is giving him the dick. So it was the Dickens were born and it went crazy from there. So we had demonic farm animals, we have steampunk dinosaurs, there's stuffed animals, like dude can't catch a break on what type of wackiness he gets. Um Slight spoil, like, not too much of a spoiler because nobody really like, Patreon knows. But I just and Brooke knows. I just added windwolves into the story for the 6th floor because we have werewolves, but why not windwolves?
Why not? Why not? It's probably worth a quick a quick clarification for everyone who isn't aware of what Dungeon Core actually is
Nope.
in the
Yeah.
briefest possible way. Can you like boil it down to like explain what it is?
Okay, so dungeon core novels are essentially a fantasy novels told from the DM standpoint. If you're going Dungeons and Dragons logic, so it is literally just the story is from the point of the view of the person making the dungeon and filling it up with monsters and traps and loot. And the story is told usually from that point of view, with watching adventurers come in and take on the dungeon and any external threats that might arise.
Okay, and that's a pretty good explanation. I think it's one of those genres where you won't really understand it until you read a book
Mhm.
in it. Lit RPG was a little bit like that back in the day. It was like it's sort of like this, and you have to just read it in some things. But yeah, that's a very good brief explanation. Um, yeah, you're watching you're seeing things unfold from a DM's perspective
Mhm.
in some ways. There are stories involved,
Yeah,
there are stories to it. It's not
I,
just kind of random event after random event, but it's the basis is that, as you say, it's the DM. So all right, so you were trying to see how crazy you could make it. Basically, that makes a lot of sense given the covers, given the given everything that's going on there. Um, Given you were making it so wacky, what was the most challenging thing in the
uh,
writing of Dungeon Core Online?
part of it, the the funniest part there is like not making it too wacky, like keeping it
Just enough.
crazy, but still within like logical means. So I can't just like, throw everything out there that I want and be like, "Oh, this is the craziest thing ever." Like I have to still make it logical.
Mhm.
So like there's the statistical things that I have to take into account when I'm putting it in and be like, "Okay, well what makes sense even if this is this crazy mob type? Like he's like a random dungeon." And I'm like, "Well, not every single random roll that for floor he's going to get has to be like completely crazy." And not only that, they can't be crazy in the same manner. Like I have to try to think of the randomness and the craziness, but then like put in the logic of it's not always, not every time is going to be, super super crazy. And so it's weird trying to like tone back the craziness to keep it crazy but believable, like
Yeah, well,
controlled
if it goes
chaos.
completely overboard, then yeah, it's not it won't work. So finding the balance between all the fun stuff, just keeping it just feet are just enough on the ground that we
Yeah,
can keep moving. Yeah.
yeah, and then writing on Royal Road, the hardest thing there is because you're writing things as a serial base and you're like putting stuff out every week. That means people are giving you feedback every week. So even if the story is developing itself and growing, people won't know what that end goal is, or they won't, they don't have all of the background information. So they're commenting on what they're seeing, but it's really hard to like navigate all of that and not let that, drive too much into you. So then like there'd be parts where I'd be like having this like 30 chapter arc of stuff going on, and for like the first 20 chapters, I'm just getting hate, like nonstop hate, and just like
Oh God.
bashing, and people being like, "I'm dropping this story. I'll come back when there's like 30 chapters," or "You're destroying this story." And then like when the ball finally drops and the plot resolves or something, everybody's like, "Oh my god, this was brilliant. This is so great." And I'm just like, "Yeah, well, thanks for the mental abuse for the last 20 chapters. Just walking away with
Oh
my
my God.
emotional damage here."
I couldn't handle that. You're a
Yeah.
brave man. So, I mean, how do you sort of resist reacting to all that feedback and changing stuff on the fly? Because I think the pressure must be there, right? To think if everyone's screaming, "I
Oh
hate
yeah.
this thing," that you might crumble. You might be, "Oh, I won't do it," even though you have that plan to go ahead. So how? Because obviously, when I'm writing a book on more traditional methods of writing books, where you just do the whole thing and then you release it, uh, you you kind of know where you're going, and you
Mhm.
just if people are reading through it later, you're like, well, they're just gonna have to trust that it's going somewhere good, and they
Yeah.
just have to kind of that's it. But and you've gone through that yourself on your end, and you haven't had that influence. So how do you prevent that getting in the way of telling the story?
I mean, part of it is I'm a pantser. So I don't plot anything that I write. So I always say that when I write, I leave it up to the characters in my mind to write the story. So as I'm writing the story, the characters are developing their own emotions and their own personalities and their own attitudes, and like I'm just seeing kind of how they're moving forward, and I can kind of like predict what they're doing. So when people are bashing at actions in the story or being like, hey, this, I hate this part, this is stupid and all that. I'm like, that's the characters. Like I'm that's just how their personality is. So like if people are dropping off, then so be it. But that's how the story is gonna flow, and I can't really change that. And then on top of that, it is hard though. Like especially I would see, a stream of one stars come in, or I would see followers actually drop off. Uh and it would hurt. But at the same time, there'd be people commenting um that they were loving it at the same time, or I'd have people in like my Discord and everything that are like the support group that's just kind of like, no, this is going great, and they'd help push it forward. But yeah, it definitely gets hard, and would suck motivation out for writing sometimes because I'm just like, well, I don't want to release these chapters because I'm just gonna get punched in the gut a couple more times. But the story's got to be told.
Yeah, we've got a question from Alicia in the chat here. She's asking, do you get any kind of beta feedback before you post, or do you
Uh,
just go straight ahead and post?
So when it comes to just my chapters, for the longest time it was just they were just getting posted just straight. Now I have my patrons have a advanced chapters. So depending on the story, they get up to like 10 chapters of advanced because I write 3 different stories at a time. Um, so I get their feedback, and since they're patrons and they're supporting me, they usually like always build me up and give me support. And they're like, "Ah, I love these chapters, this, that." So then, and those are the core people that I'm writing for and telling a story for, are the people that want to enjoy the story. So then, when I do put it out on Royal Road, even if people are gonna bash it, they're getting free content. So
You seem like you've had a. Have you had a bad week? You seem kind of like you've had a. Have you had a bashing lately? I'm sure you get tons of praise on there as well, man. I mean, you wouldn't be at 600,000 words of this story
yeah,
if people weren't following along.
yeah, and I love the story. And just since it's so far into it, like the characters have just come along so far and developed so much, and it would be a shame to drop them, and they're at this point now where like we're getting into what's potentially one of the final arcs. Because I do know how I want the story to end, but how we get there has been
Wow.
a ride since day one. Uh, so it's like the arcs don't really start when I want them to because I'll be like, okay, well this is the ending, and then it's like, well, what are the characters gonna do? Well, they're over here gaffing off doing who knows what, and I'm just like, well, we'll get around to it eventually. We'll
So you hear
find
that, folks? There is a plan. There is a plan.
it.
Okay, there's always a plan. Another question from the chat, and this is. It feels like while we're still talking about chapters, we can deal with this one. So, the question is, how important do you feel the first chapter is, and how do you normally deal with it? Now,
uh,
given you write billions of words, I mean, and your first chapter must be almost like smoke in the distance to you now. But if you can cast your mind back, like
Well, I mean,
how much? Yeah,
I started a new story recently back in September, October, no time frame, and then I started one last year back in February. So I still write new stories pretty recently. Um, and I plan on starting a new one here once I finish editing Decor 3. But like first chapters in general, always I feel like are super important because that's going to be the first thing that people are reading. As a web serial, first chapters are super important. But at the same time, it really depends on the readers. Like if you're looking at a placing chapters and stuff on a place like Royal Road, first off, a lot of readers won't even pick up a story unless there's 10 chapters to it already. Like
right.
there's this
Yeah,
whole different
yeah.
dynamic.
It's
They
a
don't want to.
different. Yeah,
So
it's a very different thing.
from the web
Mm.
serial standpoint, it's not so much that that first chapter has to be impactful. It's that that first batch, as you're doing that initial world building and like setting up that hook, is really important. I write really short chapters. I keep them punchy and fast paced. I always joke that it's kind of like a drug type thing where you just keep getting a single hit. So it pulls you through, and then it plays into that psychology of, oh, one more chapter before I go to bed. And then it's like 5 chapters
Yeah,
later.
yeah.
So because my chapters are shorter and punchier, like, I don't think my first chapter is as important as it is like my first 3 or 4 of really building that. Because then when I do release a new story, if I'm releasing it on Royal Road, I'm dropping the first 5 chapters right at the start. Like, it's not a
Right.
single chapter. I'm
Yeah.
dropping 5 because I know that people won't even pick it up unless they see enough chapters. But from a book standpoint, like, if you're just publishing a book, I feel like that first chapter has a little more importance because personally, whenever I'd go to a bookstore, cover would always draw me in. Like, I'd be skimming, and if there's a flashy cover, I'd be like, "Oh, that's cool." But I would actually pull up a book and, like, open to that first chapter and read, depending on the size of the chapter, a good chunk of that chapter before I decide if I wanted to buy the book or not. And I'm not gonna stand around in a bookstore for, an hour. So that first chapter was really key on if it was gonna hook me or not. So, like I said, I feel like it depends on the type of medium, that you're going through, book-wise.
Yeah, first chapters are just I they're sort of cursed in some ways, you know. Like just you can spend so much time on them, and
Mm,
thankfully it only really is a big deal when it's book one of a new series, and then
mm,
after that, not such a big deal.
yeah.
I can't remember how long I took. Oh yeah, I mean I must have I did like a dozen variations of the first chapter for Ascendant, but that was kind of because I was struggling to get into it. I just couldn't. I kept starting it, and it just kept this isn't right. This isn't right. Took
Oh,
me
yeah.
a lot of attempts, and I think that first chapter had the most draft drafts of any of them. Even though it's like quite short, and you know it's
Yes,
just going to pick up some meat. It's just so I do get. I think I wonder if we stress about it more than needs to be, but it is very important.
yeah, like I said, it really depends on the medium and, like, the reader base that you're going into and the fan base and everything. Like, I mean, back in 2018 when we were first starting with Bone Dungeon and everything, like, Taryn had reached out to me about the dungeon core and all, like, dungeon core writing and everything, and I wrote the first 3 or 5 chapters that you guys, like, the first 10,000 words that you guys got from me. I wrote that in a day and just sent it off to him. I was like, "Here you go." And then he passed it off to you and Brooke to read as well. So, like, I didn't put any thought into it. I was just like, "Here's this story I want to tell. Words." But I feel like that's probably that psychological effect of, like, I know just enough to get myself in trouble. So, especially at that time, I didn't have the imposter syndrome or, like, all of the know-how and worry to, like, slow me down and stop me. Like, I just pushed
Yeah,
ignorantly
yeah,
forward.
that comes later. Yeah, I remember. I remember. I remember when I used to just go for it and be like
Mhm.
happy. Oh, that was good. It wasn't
Yeah.
good, but I thought it was good.
Yep.
Uh, you start off writing, and it's a bit of a struggle. Then you reach a point where you start to be quite productive, but it's not very good. But you
Yep.
think it's great because you're being productive, and oh, it must be good because I'm writing lots.
Yep.
Then you get a slap in the face by someone, usually some kind of editor or a friend that knows what you're doing,
Yep.
tells you this puts a red pen for the whole thing, and then you start to learn, and then you reach a critical point where actually you are quite good, but now you're doubting every single thing you're doing, and so
Yep.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't know what the other side of that is yet, but maybe one day we'll get there. We'll
Yeah.
find out.
So yeah, a lot of my first came, before I got to that point where I was, like, critical of my own stuff, and I'm just like, "Ah, yeah, here, this is the greatest thing ever." And now I'm like, "Oh, what was I thinking?"
Oh, Bone Dungeon was a hit, so you were definitely onto something. So what in the few years we've been at this now, or that you've been at this, what's been your uh biggest eye-opening experience so far of publishing, of writing, of everything?
Gods, I don't even know. Um, I think the biggest thing that, like, got to me was, actually just, like, this last year when I went to Dragon Con, because the first year that I went to Dragon Con, I had just started out, like, Bone Dungeon had just come out, and so I got to talk to, like, some of the fellow authors and everything, but I was just this nobody, that I was just kinda this new person, but just last year at Dragon Con when I was there, like, there were people actually coming up to me talking about how much they loved my trilogy and how I'd, like, inspired them to write, and, like, one kid came up and he had an autograph book and he wanted, my autograph in it, and I
Wow.
just it broke me, like, I didn't know how to respond because 'cause I'm just, like, in my mind still, I'm just, like, this small little nobody, and I, like, look at everybody else's success in their books, and I'm just like, "No, go talk to these people, like, these are the important people," but they're like, "No, your story really, like, I really enjoyed your story," or, helped me through this hard time, or, like, you made me laugh and you were helping escape, and, like, I write so people can escape into my worlds because that's why I read. I always grew up reading so I could escape. But yeah, it just hit me because I didn't know how to respond to something like that because
Right,
it was
yeah.
just
No, it's
really
a
surreal.
thoroughly wholesome experience. That sounds
Yeah.
fantastic. Um, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, you're selling Dragon Con to me more and more.
Hey, like I
To
said,
come.
you come out and party. Great time.
One day, if not this year, next year, and I'll keep saying that until no, sometime
I,
for sure.
I I applied for guest status. I don't know if I'll get it, but that'd be spiffy.
Right? Yeah. No, it would be. Yeah, it'd be fun. I just like to go and just hang out in some ways. I'm not.
Oh,
I'm never too fussed about panels. I tend to put my name down for things,
mhm.
but if I don't get anything, I don't really care. But it just
Yeah,
gives some kind of like, oh yeah, I'm doing a thing. But
yeah,
I'm really there to hang out and meet people or meet friends. Like that's the main point of these things.
yeah. I was gonna say
And yeah, the
we
US
like.
cons is something I really want to do.
Oh, and Dragon Con's huge. Like the first year we went was before COVID, and that was like 100,000 plus people.
Woo!
It's spread across 5 different hotels, and, like, Dragon Con doesn't stop. Like, the whole, like, 5 days it's going on, there is stuff going on every hour of
Right.
the day, into
Yeah.
the night and everything, and it's just yeah, it's just a big party. But we love it because you get to people watch, there's all sorts of different interesting panels and stuff you get to listen to and go sit in on that you never would have gotten to otherwise, and then yeah, it's just a blast. So the only reason I applied for guest status is one, it would pay for my ticket,
Yeah.
which which is always a plus. Cutting costs, we can spend more on liquor for the weekend. And then two, I feel like part of it'd be cool to like have my name, in the
Yeah,
actual
man.
program as being like a
Definitely.
professional there.
Yeah, there's something to that. It's not. It's not a nothing thing to
Hmm.
have that. Officialdom. No, but
Yeah.
definitely. I hope you get it. When will you find out?
Probably not till like the summer.
Okay.
Yeah, they just opened up the guest stuff a couple weeks ago, so it was just kind of one of those like, well, I'll shoot my shot at it just to see if it happens. But if it doesn't, I don't really care. But if it does, then cool. Maybe I'd be on a panel with like Dakota or something, which is always fun.
I'm sure you could get on something with your blacksmithing knowledge.
The blacksmithing is where I have like the biggest imposter syndrome. At times, like it took a lot to even go do the Renaissance Festival that I was the blacksmith at.
Oh yeah, everyone. He can make actual armor and weapons. Like he's that cool. And and all that wonderful smithing you saw in Unbound was pretty much only made possible by Jonathan's extensive assistance getting the process right. I must have asked him about a million questions.
It was all good fun.
So we owe Jonathan a lot for that. So, but you feel even more imposter syndrome there? Like, why is that?
uh Part like I like the blacksmithing thing. I think it's more so just because of there's so much that goes into it. And so like I want everything to be perfect in it, and I'm always like pushing myself quality wise, perfection wise, and like uh so I'll see, stuff that the master smiths put out and I'm just like, oh man, that looks so good. And then I'll put something out and like my mind just instinctively compares it to that and I'm just like, oh, this isn't really that good. Um like I'm gonna try to get my journeyman title for bladesmithing here soon. And I have a little less imposter syndrome now because I actually had a master smith compliment my work and I helped him teach a class. Uh, but it's just yeah, it's one of those things that like I am not at the level that I want to be at, and because of that, it makes me like uncomfortable at times because I'm just like, oh, I don't think I'm that good because I'll see other people's product and I'm just like, man, like look at what they're doing compared to what I'm doing.
True, but you could do the same over on the writing, and it's never healthy to do that either, is it? So
I mean, yeah, it's never
just
healthy,
get
but
it.
that doesn't
Just get
doesn't
it. No,
doesn't mean
we
we
get it.
don't
We
do
all
it.
no, we all do it, but just try to only compete against yourself if you can.
Yeah.
and only do the other thing 10% of the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I use the
fat
kitchen
chance, eh?
forged almost every day, so
Oh, sweet. Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. No, I mean, it was wonderful, and you really knew what you were talking about because I would ask you something, and you were very authoritative on what where I was getting things wrong, what I ought to do,
mhm.
and it was so helpful. So I think you're probably doing better than you give yourself credit for
Yeah.
on the blacksmithing.
Yeah, it's and I mean, we could go into, like, all of the psychology of that and upbringing and everything with just how I was raised, and I needed to be perfect for everything, so I still beat
Right.
myself up for stuff like that, and, it's hard to overcome some of those.
Yeah. Well, it's best is there's no point beating yourself up about the writing. There's no point beating yourself up about this, right?
Yeah.
And this is what we tell ourselves all the time. And then we'll have a bad day, or the rank will drop in the book, or something bad will happen, and we kick ourselves. But the more I do this, the more I realize that all those fantasies that you think about, where you think, oh, that person is just like swimming in it, they have got all the readers, their books are totally amazing, and I'll never be as good as them. It's like that's just all built up in your mind. Like they're going through the same problems, they're having the same doubts. They had a bad month 2 months ago, when you had a good one. Like it's things aren't so rosy elsewhere.
Yeah.
People do go through the same shit that you go through.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's worth bearing that in mind. So maybe a lighter topic for you. You're a massive Pokemon fan too, I
I
believe.
am. Yes.
Yeah, we've done a couple of we did at least one Nuzlocke
Yeah, we did a
competitive in our time.
yeah. That was through,
That's
that was
for those that
the
don't know, that's
Crystal.
like a special rule set for Pokemon games where you can sort of compete against someone else in almost in a kind of speed run sort of sense, with extra rules, and it's more hazardous and makes it a lot more fun. You have to really think it through a lot more.
Yep.
So we've done at least one of those together, and you picked up the new versions, I think,
Yeah, I did,
or the
and,
remakes.
oh, man,
Yeah.
I've been playing a lot of, Legend of Arceus,
Oh
lately.
yeah, you got it. Okay, so I don't want to know too many spoil. Is it good? Is
Oh,
it
yeah,
good?
yeah. Oh my gosh. I
Okay.
like personally, I feel like it's, like, the best Pokemon game out there now.
Oh,
Um, just, like, everybody's been bashing on, like, the graphics. They're like, "Oh, these aren't the greatest graphics," and I'm like, "Psh, compared to any other Pokemon game, these graphics are
no.
amazing."
Yeah, Pokemon isn't a franchise known for its
Yeah, I'm like,
stunning graphics.
we went from overhead, like 2D type little sprites to all of a sudden this open world, full on Pokemon adventure. And people are like, oh, the graphics just aren't that great compared to other things on the Switch. I'm like, are you really? This is the ground you're
It
standing on?
was it was a little worrying. Like on the trailers and stuff that I've seen,
Mhm.
yes, it's open world, but it doesn't look as good as Breath of the Wild, obviously. But then it also doesn't feel as refined or lived in. It feels almost a little. It looked a little rushed. My worry was this was like a little rushed, and it could have used an extra couple of years in the oven
Mhm.
just to like fill it out. It looked like maybe they were rushing it, but
Yeah, I
that
mean,
was just an impression.
I've uh, I've put in a lot of time into it. The crafting's pretty spiffy in it. Uh, it feels more like what they originally were going for with Pokemon because, like, every I mean, I started playing Pokemon on Red and Blue, and it was like, the great times of, oh, well, here's this Pokedex that I want you to fill out, and that was like your original goal, but then you just went around and got badges and beat the Elite Four, and you're like, haha, I'm the greatest. Here's my 6 Pokemon that are level 100 now, and
Right.
who cares about filling out that Pokedex anymore? Um, Whereas like Legend of Arceus, like the whole purpose of it, like first and foremost, is filling up that Pokedex and like discovering all of the Pokemon and like you get all sorts of different tasks to do with it, and like each Pokemon, depending on it, has different tasks that you have to do with regards to it to complete its Pokedex page. So it's just this constant like going out there and exploring and doing new things in the game, which is really fun.
Right. Okay.
and
And
eventually you get to
so
fly around, which is
there's
pretty.
no other people. There's no trainers, right?
Oh no, you still fight trainers.
Or you do?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's an actual like full on story. Instead of gym leaders, they're called wardens. But like
Right. Sure.
and there's a story that progresses with that. But like depending on
Okay.
how like what level of Pokemon you can control and everything, that's all based off of how your Pokedex progress has been going. So like you're actually getting rewarded for like discovering new Pokemon and evolving
Actually, okay.
Pokemon and like doing that
Yeah.
versus just, oh, I went and power leveled and beat these 5 gym leaders and now I'm
Hmm.
able to have Pokemon up to level 60 or something. No, it's like, oh yeah, I discovered 50 different species of Pokemon and evolved them and filled out these pages. So now Pokemon up to level 50 will listen to me because I'm knowledgeable.
Okay. I think I was always going to try it, but I was a little wary. But
Yeah, I
okay.
feel like you were a little
I'm
worried
more
about getting
hopeful now.
sucked into it though, too. Like you
Yeah.
were worried it was going to
Why?
steal your productivity.
My productivity's been, yeah, gripped by a few other things right now, but Legends
Uh,
of Arceus at some point will destroy my productivity. Yeah, if book three's late, sorry, yeah, it'll
Oh
be
yeah,
Jonathan's fault for convincing me to get
they
this
have
game.
alpha variations of the Pokemon, which are like larger than their other counterparts.
Yeah, I've seen
There's
that,
gonna
the
be
like little bosses.
yeah, but you can catch them. So
All
then you
right,
can run around with like giant versions of your Pokemon, which is hilarious. The shiny rate's better, so it's actually easier to find shinies.
I've never cared about shinies. I don't care. I don't know
Uh,
why people have like an obsession
I like
with
my
shinies.
blue flamed Ponyta is where it's at.
Yeah. I'm actually surprised they haven't put things in the games to like customize the actual Pokemon yet, because people love that stuff, and I I know Nintendo are quite good for this, but I'm like any other company would have microtransaction the hell out of that.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, definitely.
change your Pokemon's stripes.
Uh, they did that for the Pokemon League of Legends game that just came out last year. That's micro transaction the hell out of because you can put like different costumes and stuff on your
Hmm.
Pokemon champion, and then you can buy stuff to unlock new champions in it and everything. But it's League of Legends, but Pokemon.
Right, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, it's on the
Oh
Switch.
God, oh, is it?
Yep, free to play, but
Uh,
then you can either grind or buy stuff in it.
right, yeah, that's probably why. Yeah, I don't no time for that.
Yeah,
Don't like that. Give me a complete thing, please. I don't have to grind 10 million hours to get anywhere.
yep. But yeah, so Legend of Arceus is definitely something I feel like you will enjoy a good bit. But definitely you will want a weekend to start on.
Oh, okay. Well, brace myself. I've also ordered The Witcher 3 because I've always wanted to get into The Witcher, but I've always hated the combat in it. Like to
Yeah.
my core, I hated the mechanics of the combat. But something about The Witcher, the world, I always like the show is like almost great, and I want to like it, and I forgive a lot of bad bits in it, and then I like the stuff that I like in it. I like a lot. And the same with the books. It was like there was stuff that I really loved, and there was a lot of stuff that I was just like, "What is this?" And so I if the game, I think I just want to get into it.
Mhm.
I might just put it onto like face mash mode by just slam my head off of the controller to get through the fights, just to get to the story,
Yeah.
which people will probably be laughing at me for. But the mechanics sort of hate the controls. But I'll give it a go. I'm just I can't I don't know why, but I keep returning to it, wanting to like it,
Mhm.
the whole thing. So yeah, that's my next project. That's my next distraction after my current distraction.
You just
Um,
gotta play. Did you play? What was it? Phoenix.
no,
Oh, I can't remember what I can't remember the full name of the game. Oh, Phoenix Rising. It was like God of War meets Legend of Zelda. It was so good,
oh jeez, God.
but Greek mythology where it's at. But yeah, simpler
So
combat because
in
The
the
Witcher combat's clunky.
it is clunky, right? But in and around playing all these games that you play,
Mm.
uh, one, how do you? sit down and focus and get some writing done. And I've got a follow up.
Uh, um,
He
don't hate
laughs
me.
nervously. Nervously laughs. How's that deadline doing?
Well, don't hate me, but I can usually write like 2 or 3 thousand words in about an hour.
No, I hate you. It's done.
Oh, yeah. If I'm writing, I usually only spend like 2 hours of writing a day.
I got 1,800 words done today, and I thought that was a very good day. A
Oh yeah,
very good
yeah.
day, sir.
I did. I did 2,300 yesterday in an hour, in between waiting on Travis to have a lunch break while he was mid narration.
Travis Baldry, who's currently recording, uh,
Dicking around.
taking around. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah. So because I've been
So,
editing
so you,
P-Core 3 while he's
yeah.
been recording, and then I was writing when he wasn't recording.
So you blast it out in an hour and then just goof off. Is that what you're saying?
Well, right now I'm editing, and editing actually takes me time. So like I can't goof off
The
in editing.
pitchforks in the audience.
But yeah, if I'm writing, it's like 1 or 2 hours of writing a day. But part of that is just to like manage, burnout because I write quick.
Hmm.
But if I'm trying to push more out, especially with pantsing, um, then I risk like stealing kind of some of the character from the characters.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, we all get that. I mean, even though I'm a turtle compared to you, like there's a certain point where you just can't push it more in a day. It's done. You're sort of mentally done, and it's just best to leave it.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
that's also why I write.
but
Like that's why I work on multiple stories per week, is because it helps with avoiding burnout. Because then I don't like get tired and fatigued of the same story. So if I
yeah,
don't feel like if the characters just aren't talking for like DCO one day, then I can still write aced or dead. Then just flip them around whenever I need to.
cool. And do you have any interesting writing habits? Any occult rituals? Do you always have to like have your coffee cup facing exactly southwest or something? With like, what's your weird thing? What's your weird
Uh,
quirk? We've
I
all got one, don't lie.
I have the exact same writing playlist that I listen to every time. Like
Oh,
I
okay.
will I will
Is it is it
start it.
is it orchestral stuff? Is it like got words, or is it just music without words?
So for the longest time, it used to just be like it always started on "Something Wild" by Lindsey Sterling. Like that was my writing list for like 3 years. Um, Last year it shifted to starting with Imagine Dragons Warriors. And then just within the last like month, it shifted to where the first song is Surface Pressure from in Encanto.
All right, yeah,
But yeah, so I always have to start like that's the song. Like if I'm getting down to write, I pull it up and
yeah.
that's the playlist that starts, and it's always the same songs. Um,
See, if there was any words, I wouldn't be able to do it. Wouldn't be able to do it. I think I used to long ago have some music on that had lyrics, but
mm,
that quickly faded. Now it's all got to be ambience or game music or something like that, where it's just background stuff and it, there's no words to get in the way. Because if I hear anyone speaking, I'm at the office where I rent and someone just has a loud conversation or asks loudly to make a cup of tea for a colleague, I'm
mhm.
like thrown out. So
Oh yeah,
like,
no.
I,
Yeah. If I get pulled out of my flow
no
state, it's a
words.
bad day. But it's one of those like I don't actually listen to the words or anything. Like it's just it's because it's a familiar sound in the
Hmm.
background that just creates like this familiar kind of white noise that lets me like hyper focus in on the page that I'm working on.
Yeah,
So it's really just providing an ambience to keep any other distracting sounds out of my office area. So I'll just blare the same thing because that's familiar, so I can tune it out safely, and it hides any other distracting sounds or anything that would bother me, and lets me just get into a flow state.
yeah. There's also something to the whole it. No matter what it is, if there's some kind of little routine that you do
Hmm.
every single time, it just starts to lock your mind into be like, okay, this is writing time now.
Yep.
And if you
Yeah.
don't do it, it takes you far longer to start, right?
Yeah. And so like if I get into the office and I'm like, I know I need to write, but I'm like having trouble, I usually like pull up Magic and play a game or two of
Hmm.
Magic to just kind of ease back into getting my mind kind of like relaxed enough because it's magic is just something that I can relax to.
Yeah, especially if you're pantsing. I'm kind of a hybrid. I plot and then I have a decent idea of what I want to happen, but then I sort of pants through a chapter or through a scene. But I have like my skeleton framework to
Yeah,
hang things off of. Whereas, yeah, I think if it was just purely pantsing it, you'd have to have your brain quite in a nice, you know,
yeah,
free state where you're going to start having ideas because I don't know. But obviously, it was just quite different. I couldn't just sit there and just write something. I need to know kind of what I'm doing beforehand. I don't know. I don't know how you do it. And then not only that, but to write like 2 or 3 thousand words in one chunk is very impressive.
Well, I like I said, part of that is, I mean, I write, small chapters, so it's like 3,000 words, usually like 2 chapters. But it's just like that's the scene that's going on. So like, if it's a fight, like that might be some aspects of the fight that's going on, or if it's like um a serious scene where like some information's being talked about, or like they're planning out their next move, like it's that singular scene taking place, and I'm just describing, what the characters are doing for that small kind of thing. Like I'm just kind of the reporter, sitting in the background, writing up the the quick notes version of it, the spark notes.
Uh, well, it's working. It's working.
I actually there was a time like when I was in Afghanistan, um, I wrote 2 stories, like 2 books. And they were like 110,000 words, but I did them in a month each because it was like those I actually did plot. Like if you want to talk about productivity, like if I plotted something, like it actually like took a day to just be like, okay, here's 30 chapters and each chapter is going to cover this singular thing and we're going to take the characters through this and like force them through it. Oh yeah, I can be productive. I just don't I feel like it takes away some of the characterization and like the feeling in it, which is why I generally don't do it, is because it like shoehorns me
Sure.
into it and doesn't give them wiggle room. Whereas if I feel like, especially with lit RPG, as a genre in general, keeping that like human sporadic kind of craziness in it and letting the characters really just kind of like explore and do their own thing, I feel like just fits better into the genre.
Yeah. Well, the whole a purely pantsing process is Stephen King does that, and in his
Yep.
book he sort of recommends you do that, even though it's not going to suit everyone. But
Yeah.
so perfectly valid, perfectly works well.
Yeah. So it's
I think you're right. I think it probably keeps some of the character stuff a little more natural because one thing you can do if you plan stuff out is that you might occasionally force a character to do something,
yeah.
and then you might be able to temper it into and so that it kind of works. But there might just be that tiny little bit of it that's just a little bit forced because you were trying to make them do something
Yeah.
preordained.
And yeah,
Um,
and I
Whereas
feel like
if it's natural, they'll feel very much like themselves, but the plot might meander a little bit or however.
yeah,
You
yeah,
see that a little bit in Game of Thrones and things like that. The
yeah.
characters feel very themselves. But so I keep interrupting you. I think just
No worries. So, yeah, there's a happy medium that can probably be found between it all. Because yeah, if you full on outline and plot everything, it starts to feel really formulaic and like um I have a super analytical mind. So if I'm reading books, like even if I'm reading like, fantasy novels, like reading Salvatore or Jordan or Tolkien, like any of that, like starting to read them, my mind can already like pick up all the plot points and figure out where it's going and just be like, okay, here's, probably what's going to happen next. And it just starts to predict it because it's, set and plotted out like that. Same with like watching shows. I can watch a show and halfway through be like, oh, well, this is going to be their big reveal because of XYZ type of thing. So like
That's the
pantsing
murderer.
right. Yeah, like the pantsing keeps it from doing that because if I don't know where it's going, then
Sure, no one's gonna
obviously
know. Yeah.
there's oh my god, so that was the greatest for like Bone Dungeon and stuff because like especially Brooke would point things out in like book 2 and 3. He's like, "Oh man, you seeded this so well in book 1." And I'm like, no." I was like, I had no idea this was going to play a part in book 3, Brooke. Like that surprised you and me
Brooke,
both.
Brooke Aston, for those out there, who is one of my colleagues at Portal, and who is basically the best editor in the world, edits Jonathan's books, and basically edits the Songs of Chaos books too. Let's be real.
I refer to him as my handler. Everybody in my Discord knows that
Your
he's my
minder,
handler.
yeah. All right. So coming up to an hour, won't keep you too much longer. But I'd like to know. I ask this of pretty much everyone that comes on because I think it's an interesting thing to hear what people have to say. If you could go back in time now, go back to before you launched your very first book, uh, or started it. Other people have come on that are purely indie. So just go back to the beginning. What's the one piece of advice you wish you had known then that you know now?
Well, from a purely financial standpoint, start a Patreon sooner.
Right.
Just because it's a lot easier to grow your Patreon when your story's first starting out than once you're established. Especially when it comes to like web serials and everything. Like, as with most things, the farther along you get in a story, you've got that core group, but getting new viewers is usually harder. Whereas when a series is first launched and there's all that hype, that's usually the best time to
Mm,
build followers and
right. Yeah.
viewers. So yeah, definitely shoehorned myself in that regard because yeah, I didn't know what I was doing.
Few of us do, man. So that's fine. Few of us do. All right. So start Patreon sooner if you're going to do web series.
Yeah,
Start straight away.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Do
But
you think
otherwise,
Patreon's still viable these days for new people, or do you think it's kind of closing off a little bit?
uh, from a personal standpoint, COVID definitely hurt. Um, just the last few years of COVID, I lost a lot of followers and Steam when COVID first hit, which was understandable because I even told them I was like, look out for your guys' self first, and like if you're losing your jobs or your hours are getting cut because of COVID, like don't support me because you need to pay your own bills. I'll figure it out. But I don't know. It's so hard. It's so hit or miss. Really, because just one, a lot of the popular Patreons, especially for writers, are either hyper popular serials that started 3 or 4 years ago. So things like The Wandering Inn, He Who Fights with Monsters, those got massive followings. Legend of Randomly Ghost End, like those are some of the largest writing Patreons, I think. But those started a couple years ago, so it's getting flooded, and the risk is a lot of there's so many more stories and everything hitting at the same time that it's really hard to like stand out. So if you are trying to do it, like your story needs to have, especially web serial wise, you need to usually have like a good cover already lined up and have a
Yeah.
backlog of chapters and try to like get your story on there at a time that like won't be competing with too many other stories so you can hit the algorithm just right to hit the front page to get all the views. Like it's more difficult, but that's just most things in time. It's same with the genre, like lit RPG as it is. Like there are new standouts coming out all the time, like Beware of Chicken's huge, Reincarnated as a Farmer. These stories, came out of left field and everybody's loving them. But it's not, you don't see it as often as you used to. And so the fields just the mountains and everything get steeper to climb. So you're trying to like dig in where so many people have already dug in, and it's difficult at times.
Yeah. And I think you were. Was there one other piece of advice you wanted to give your past self there before I jumped in with the Patreon question?
Oh, past self. Yeah,
Yeah.
past self. Write normal lit RPG because had I written normal lit RPG back in 2018, 2019, probably would have hit off a lot harder than just straight niche dungeon core. When you've got a smaller reader base, that means your your fan base becomes smaller.
I'm sure they appreciate the dungeon code though.
Oh yeah, no, and I love the
Yeah.
genre. Like I love writing dungeon core. It's just from the business minded side, if I had started writing just straight lit RPG a couple of years ago and cultivation, those are bigger markets than dungeon core, and they always will be. And it's okay,
Yeah.
that's understandable, but it just
Yeah. It just is. I mean, it's worth. It's anyone that wants to. to try to do this full time. If that's your ambition, is to be full time, you should have some eye on the market. Like sounds skeevy to some people, but if you write something that's might be marvelous, but if no one really wants to buy it,
Yeah.
as marvelous as it may be, your dream of being a full time writer is not going to happen.
Yeah, and that
So yeah, it's worth considering and just trying to find the sweet spot between what you want, what you would love to write, and what people would love to read.
yeah, and that's what I said. It was like it's advice to like past self type stuff because like I said, I
Oh yeah,
love what I'm
oh for
doing. But
sure.
hindsight, I could have been in a better position, and like I love what I'm doing, and I write. I love writing stories, but I have started branching out and writing other stories other than just Dungeon Core to line up because you've got to keep. I got to keep that momentum flowing, and it gets exhausting at times to just keep ramping it out. So trying to like branch out a little more to like relieve some pressure is always nice.
Yeah,
Someday I'll be
it's like
the young adult fantasy, author and,
like,
have a movie or
that's a
TV show out.
that's a
It'll
real
be
segue.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've got many years ahead, so many years ahead, lots of books, and yeah, who knows what will be next.
Yep. My favorite term from when I was in the Marines, it was Semper Gumby, which is just always flexible, was the joke. So
Always flexible.
yeah,
The
whatever gets
lesson
thrown at
known
you.
marine. Say that again. How do we say it?
The joke was Semper Gumby. Like, did you ever see that Gumby TV show from like 80s and 90s, late 80s, early 90s? I want to say. It
Doesn't
was
sound like something that made it over here,
yeah,
unless I'm
he's
just
like a green little clay thing that was super flexible because he's clay. And so yeah, the joke
okay.
was Semper Gumby because you just had to kind of reflexively react to whatever was thrown at you and adapt.
Yeah, yeah. That is what we have to do an awful lot, given when algorithms change and all sorts of things change seemingly every year, and seemingly for no other reason than they just want to change them. So
Yeah.
always be flexible. It's a good way to write. Well, been going for about an hour. I'd like to, well, I think that's a good spot to end it. Always be flexible. Thanks very much for your time, Jonathan. It's been great chatting.
Cheers.
And just before we head off, would you like to tell everyone where they can find your books or where they can follow you online? Like where can people come find you?
Yeah, so on Amazon, everything I publish through Portal Books is under Jonathan Smidt. First book of my Elemental Dungeon trilogy is Bone Dungeon. First book in my Dungeon Core Online stuff is labeled Decor 1 because it's Dungeon Core Online Remastered Edition. Because one, it was
Quite a
fun to make.
mouthful.
Well, it was me thinking I was being funny because the original story's name was DCO, Dungeon Core Online. Again, I was poking fun at Lit RPG and being crazy when I was writing that. So when we set it up for publishing, because we were taking the web serial and editing it, I came up with Remastered Edition. That way, the acronym was just Decor. So my book is literally just Dungeon Core if you acronym it. So I thought I was being witty, but I always feel like I have to explain it more than being witty would have would have fit in. But yeah, so that's the joke between the mouthful there is it's just I just call them Decor 1, Decor 2. Um, I don't ever say the full title because it is a mouthful, but that's the whole reason it's a mouthful is because I was trying to make a fun acronym.
And do you have a website, any social media you want to plug?
I don't have a website because I'm not cool. I'm on Royal Road under Glyax. I'm on Patreon under Glyax. My Discord, I feel like most of the people chatting in here have either been to my Discord or know people in my Discord. Um, but yeah, otherwise I'm on all the Facebook lit RPG groups under Jonathan Smidt. Yeah, I'm really bad about self branding and advertising, so I'm just kind of me. I don't do anything extra.
That's fine. All right. Well, cheers again for coming, man. It's great to chat
Yep.
to you. Thanks everyone for coming along tonight for the first chat of the year. Thanks for the questions, and we'll be back in I think 2 weeks with another guest. The idea going forward is we're doing them roughly every other Saturday, but just keep an eye out on the events channel in Discord, and we'll give you all the information there. All right. Bye for now, guys.